Tonight's guest is Daniil Molodkov. He's an instructor with BrainStation. He shows tonight what to me was some very surprising vulnerability. We talk about imposter syndrome, we talk about burnout, we discuss the things that he sees in his students, which differentiate the high performers from the merely okay performers. And I think that you might be surprised as to what the answer is. So come along with me for this journey, and I hope that you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed filming it. Thank you. So it looks like you've got yourself a condenser mic in the background and the whole. So you do a bit of music on the side, I guess. I think I remember that from earlier.
Yeah, I kind of repurposed my home studio as, I guess, my in-class studio because I'm working from home now.
Right, like all of us. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so the did you get a chance to read the interview preparation document?
Yeah, I went through
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So, the obligatory reminder that this is an interview and that it's going to be broadcast and things like that. So keep that in mind.
Sure.
And then the next thing that I started doing just yesterday with Jeff was, can I get a YouTube thumbnail face right off the bat? So like try and close in on your camera and like just make like some sort of hello face.
I'm not good at hello faces, but I can try. Sure. My
Yeah,
glasses are all like,
yeah, that's amazing. I love it. It will be perfect. I'll now can you pull back
um,
just a little, just pull back a little bit because I want to get like your whole head. Yeah, that's perfect. I love it. I love it. So we will turn you into clickbait just like anybody else.
I
It's
guess you don't have to take a screenshot of that. So I
no,
realized
no, no.
you
So
just
I what yeah,
screenshot the videos.
yeah, what that's what I do. I just output a few raw frames right at the spot. I skip through and I just get the actual picture.
That's perfect. I'm actually kind of curious. Yeah, how do you record it? Is it like just in Zoom a setting to do it 1080 for the
uh
quality purposes?
yeah, so right now I've got Zoom set up. I believe I have to double check that because I did configure it to be um high quality video and Zoom. You know what? I do not have HD turned on. So I
Let me
will
check.
I will absolutely edit that part out.
Okay.
um,
Looks like I'm okay.
anyways, so let's get rolling and the place that I like to start. Oh yeah, so I record in Zoom. I there is a setting in Zoom to save each audio track as a separate file, and
Mm.
so I just turned that on today because I've been having some audio problems. So this time, hopefully, I will manage to record. And so like if your channel has some pop and some hiss on it, I can mute it while we're going back and forth. So in theory, this will turn out much better than the last round.
I hope it should be okay.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, mostly it's about the things we say to each other, right? It's about being interesting in that respect. And I'm going to reduce the gain on my mic because I think that was giving me problems yesterday. Um, you can still hear me okay though? I just turned down my mic a little.
Yeah, you're good on my end. Yeah.
Okay. So let's start. Why don't you start by telling me where where did you get your first, what are your first memories in technology? Where did you start?
Wow, you're starting with like really deep stuff, which sounds kind of weird probably, but um yeah, I mean, I'm originally from Russia. So I
Yeah.
came to Canada when I was about 16. So I also lived in a very small town in Russia. So me having a computer was like a big deal. So I think like I've always been interested in technology. We didn't even have NES. Like We had like a
Yeah.
very knockoff version of NES. That was my first, I guess, interaction with like game consoles, right? Like through
Right.
gaming, I really got interested in that. I had like a Super Nintendo, and then eventually, my parents got like a PC. If I remember, it was like a 386 with,
Nice.
I don't know, like eight. I might be lying to you now, but like
It
8K
was
of
either 4 or 8 megs of RAM at that
RAM.
time, I would imagine.
That sounds about right. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember how it got like upgraded to 12, I think. And I felt like that was the fastest computer ever. So
Yeah.
that's my, I think, like but as back as it gets
Yeah.
in historical, um, in historical context.
Right.
Yeah. So I think I mostly was always interested in like games and stuff like that, but I would
Yeah.
dabble in, um, more, I guess, like technology side of things, especially when internet started happening. And by technology side of things, I mean actually doing something with my hands, right? Not just consuming technology, but actually doing something there as well, which started off with kind of like GeoCities style of
Okay.
websites, right?
Yeah.
Where you would just, I guess, try and do these like templates. I don't like, I don't have the best memory, but I'm assuming I would be using something like front page or something like that that
Yeah.
comes like pre-installed on your computer.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was one of those things. The reason I bring it up is I never really thought of it that way, right? It's just like computers, you can do different things, and I'd never thought of it as, okay, like websites. This is what I want to do. I want to like have that as my job or anything like that. I was always interested in computers, and I thought that my job would always be kind of like related to computers. But I've never thought of myself as a programmer. Anytime I would like try doing it, to me it seemed very dry, I would say, right? Like where it's like, oh, I'm missing something that um that I need, right? Because I don't know, maybe it's my like the way I was brought up in school where like you're either good at something or you're not good at something. And to me that was the feeling towards like technology where like I enjoy consuming it. I like playing games. I like playing around with different software. But never thought that I would be the technologist myself.
Right. Okay. So you're in high school, you're taking a few courses. Do you um and you're actually making some websites in front page. At this time, are you hosting them somewhere as well, or how are you, or are you just running them locally and showing your mom and dad, and that's it? Like,
Mm. Yeah, I think there were platforms, both in like the Russian internet side of things, which was
okay.
its own little ecosystem, and it still is to an extent. And then when I came to Canada, which I guess, yeah, like if we want to jump back to high school, for example, right?
Yeah.
That would be something like GeoCities, and I'm sure you can remind me of other like free hosting
Yeah.
platforms that you could do. You get like those 10 megs of free space, and you can
Yeah.
upload whatever you want, right? That was kind of, yeah, I guess my
Yeah.
intro into that. Yeah.
Okay. I think I recall having some of those too. Not GeoCities, but there were definitely those guys that were like freewebhosting.com, and they would give you your, yeah, they'd give you your tiny amount of space and you'd put something up there. So through school, um, did you take any programming courses in high school, or did did you start learning at the college or university level?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've taken programming in grade 10 or 11, uh,
Okay.
if I remember. And I think I was like Visual Basic.
Yeah.
And this is a bit of a, I don't know if it's an embarrassing story. It's just a real story that
Yeah.
I was kind of a bit of a pain in the ass when I came to Canada, if I'm being honest. Because like I almost graduated school in Russia, and then I have
Right.
to go back to school. So let's just say that I wasn't really that concentrated on the studies, right?
Yeah.
So that programming course, and I don't know why I put it in quotes, it was like an actual programming course. I didn't do too well with it.
Okay.
I think part of it was my English was pretty bad at that
Yeah.
point. And yeah, let's just say my first interaction with Visual Basic was kind of like I very quickly lost track of everything that's happening, which was another, right? Like if we're keeping track of all the times where I'm like, I'm probably not good at it. That was
Yeah.
another like notch in like I'm probably not good at it. However, when I went to high school, I took a couple of courses that were more
Sorry, high
multimedia.
school. By high school, do you mean college? Because high school in Canada is um, you're up to 18, whereas after 18, you move on to either college or university.
Yeah, so I guess like when
Yeah.
I was in grade 10, that was still high school.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I,
Okay.
my first like programming course really didn't go too well. But when I was in grade 11 or 12, I took graphic design and something related to multimedia, as well as um, it was drama, but it was like video drama, what it was called. So
Okay.
that was a combination of well, for design, obviously it was Photoshop, Illustrator. I think I was like, that's pretty cool. I enjoyed doing
Yeah.
that. Really enjoyed working on the Mac because I don't know if remember those. Remember those like Candy Macs? The one
Yes.
that was like I think they had like names like Blueberry and stuff like that. It was just like very unique to me, and I guess I'm a very visual person, so it was very appealing that technology can be like almost sexy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so that was my interest in the visual side of things, which brought me to, I guess, more interactive. So it was either interactive multimedia or something like that, right? But the purpose of it was just learning a bit of Flash. And then video drama was a bunch of post processing, right? So we didn't use things like
Oh.
After Effects or anything like that, but we still did quite a bit of, I think like Final Cut, or I don't remember
Right.
what we were using. So that was kind of like the first germination of like the real professional interest for me, because I always wanted to do in high school. I don't know why I say always. In high school, I wanted to do that. I wanted to do film actually.
Yeah.
And specifically, I was interested in the production side of things. So that was
Okay.
kind of like the idea of what I wanted to do after high school. So I wanted to go into film, and specifically so like video editing or something like that.
Yeah. And so from there, did you go into it? I would imagine you would go to a college program for that to try and really focus in that space. At that time, then, are you, you're, and I'll let you fill this in.
For sure.
Are you doing the editing courses at a college like a Seneca or something? And then you're doing web stuff on the side as well? Like, how do these things merge together? Tell me the story of that next phase.
Yeah, I love that question. It was literally that. Yeah, like things kind of fell into place in a way. So I did go to college. So good catch on that. I went to Humber.
Okay.
Um, and the program was called Multimedia Design and Production, right? So that was the multimedia production side of things that I was really interested in. And I think like part of it was um, very personal attention. Like I met the dean of the department, I guess you would call. I apologize if that's called something else. But
That's
basically,
close enough. Yeah.
I think, yeah, he's like a dean of not school, but like the multimedia side of courses, because there were a bunch of them. And there were a couple of audio production and video production courses, which I was obviously interested in. And the multimedia side of things was a bunch of other things, which would include web essentially, because that's part of the media, and also, oh, it's mostly web. But web was split into like server side at that time, PHP,
Yep.
client side, and then Flash, of course, because that's
Right.
time check 2006.
Yeah. So that was the yeah, that was the time when Flash was still riding high, I
Yeah,
think.
but maybe while we're talking about Flash, let me, if you don't mind, continue the
Yeah,
story, because it
for
actually plays
sure.
a huge role here, right? So I go into school. I'm interested in video production, and I did have video production courses in audio production, and I guess I still enjoy audio side of things, even though I kind of more do, I guess, music production. So a lot of these things kind of like fell into place later on in my life, right? So I had all these interests, but not all of them necessarily were direct interest at the time. So while I was at Humber, I kind of decided that I should be a designer because I was really enjoying the design courses. But what was interesting is that some of my profs were really kind of like impressed by my interest that I didn't even catch on myself in Flash specifically. And I was
Right.
like, oh, interesting. So maybe I am good at Flash. It was like one of those things where I was thinking maybe I should be more of a designer, because again, I have this I don't know, PTSD about like I'm not a programmer,
Right.
right? So when we're talking about Flash, that was for us actually kind of interesting. I was in a 2-year program, and Flash went from the first year that I was in college to the second year that I was in college. That was literally the transition from ActionScript 2 to ActionScript 3. I don't know how much you know about Flash, but
A little. I think I've written a couple of video games, and I can't remember which action script I was using. So I just had things like uh, sort of Pong spaceship type games where you just fly around in a tiny square, like very low level, like stuff that you would just give away. I made an ad for Reddit for free once. I think it was.
name dropping.
Well, I mean, they didn't
No
ask me
biggie, no
for it.
biggie.
Yeah,
I just did an ad for Reddit, you know.
yeah. No,
But,
they didn't ask me for it. I just
yeah,
did it anyways. It's like,
yeah, I
yeah,
didn't want it. That's funny.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so not that it matters, but like ActionScript 2, I would say kind of, I don't know what to compare it to, but it's kind of like 2008 JavaScript versus what we have now, right? Like it's very
right.
big gap of like the language features, and
Yeah,
AS2 was more of like, you know, it's a scripting language, and AS3 was like a proper language. It has the classes, it's like proper or object-oriented language. Um, but for me, I think it was that. It was the combination of, right, because I have interest in film,
yeah,
I have interest in design, and Flash
yeah,
was sort of this combination of things where it's very
right.
interactive, but at the
Yeah,
same time, like I can write code and it does things. So at that point, I I guess got rid of a little bit of these preconceived notions. I'm like, well, maybe I can be a programmer, right? Whatever that means. And I think like that was really that like click moment for, well, you don't have to be like a programmer necessarily, right? Like you can just be a coder, a developer. So I think that was when I kind of felt okay with that I don't have
right,
to put like huge labels on myself.
right. I think that's actually from what I have seen, and you know, take it for what it's worth, because I maybe have not seen that much, but a lot of my understanding is that a lot of the people who move from the artistic field and
Mm.
the design field into a programming field, they do it because they need to create something, and the only way to achieve that next level of creation is through the use of code and programming, right? Because if you've got something like, I want my uh, I want my background to be shimmering like it's in the
Mm.
Matrix. Well, you could hand craft each one of those frames, but you can't quite timeline it in Flash. You can't do anything, and so the artists who want to move into that next level of creation, they in some cases they just have to by design adopt code as their central, well, not their central, I mean, it's just a tool for them off to the side most of the time,
Yeah,
anyways.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, no,
uh,
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's like it's an interesting like topic, because you and we understand that, right? Like the power of code, and that code can be so many different things. I think where, and this probably I'm sure I'm jumping in like the way that how you want to do the cadence of this talk, but it's something that I recognize a lot right now, like dealing
yes,
with people who come from all kinds of backgrounds. There is this
yes,
understanding, or I would say a bit of a stereotype, that coding only means this, right? Or like the
right,
programmers, they mean this. So I think having this barrier of entry be reduced by the technology that we have nowadays, it really helps a lot with yeah, with those like creative types and stuff.
yeah,
Even like the tools that we use nowadays, I don't find them as something that's gonna um like we're not going to lose their jobs over it. I'm talking about things like Figma, for example. Like
Okay.
I see, I don't know, I'm sure
You'll
you've worked
you'll
with
have to take a step back and explain to me what Figma is.
Sketch. You know what Sketch is?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So um, it is a Photoshop like program used for creating the visual layout of websites.
I
Is
think it's
that
more, yeah, it's very close to that, and I'm probably going to be laughed at by all the UX people. But it's more Illustrator, in my understanding, because it's
okay?
vector, right? So
Yeah.
I'm going to drop my knowledge here that I know with vectors. Um, it's more like Illustrator. Reason I bring up not Sketch specifically, but Figma, because in my understanding, Figma is almost like a next level of these user experience tools that allow you not only build out the prototypes and the mockups, but they can actually be fully interactive. And that's the part that like really blows my mind, right? Where you can
Right.
just connect the pages. I don't know how dynamic they can be. So that's where it probably isn't going to be fully taken over, just
Yeah.
kind of like from scratch coding, obviously. But if
Right.
you just want to build out something that's going to be like an interactive website, right, that doesn't need dynamic elements or anything like that, they're such powerful tools. But it like just to take it back to your point about the artistic expression, right? That's where you like if you think of it back 10 or 20 years ago when I, for example, started, right?
We
There
had
was
Dreamweaver at the time, where was
yeah,
this?
which was
Yeah.
yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
Well,
Dreamweaver.
I mean, Dreamweaver at the time was this WYSIWYG, or this what you see is what you get website creation tool, and you just sort of like draw your tables and everything, and it produces the website. Now, the HTML behind it was known for being quite terrible, but
Yeah,
it
it's
was so early in the web, nobody cared. So and the fact that if you're saying Figma is vector based, maybe that's much better for making HTML, because Photoshop is very, very much bitmap heavy, and individual pixel heavy. So large vectors becomes easier to work with. So you're saying that this tool, and are you teaching Figma at BrainStation as part of your web developer course, or is that a different stream beside you?
so we have a couple of full-time courses, and one of them is UX. Okay, so
Okay.
um, we get to interact with UX students once in a while. They're just kind of like collaborative projects, so we get to see how they work with their tools essentially.
Right.
We do use Figma on in the web dev program, but more from perspective of consuming the projects that are built in
Right.
Figma, right? So
Right.
that's just because it's something that would be an industry standard nowadays for front-end developers specifically. Either Sketch or
Okay.
Figma, I think, are very, very popular. So
Very
the way it
popular.
would work for front-end developer is when they're getting mockups from design or from their UX people, they'll most likely get it in Figma. So that's the
It-
connection essentially here.
right. Okay. Okay. So, um, and you know, the talk can go wherever it goes. I have a chronological plan in mind, but if you want to do tangents, this is about you, and so don't worry about that. um but if I bring it back to chronologically, you are working in Flash. You've sort of discovered that Flash is this perfect blend of your not necessarily deep computer skills, but definitely deep computer skills relative to possibly the other people in the film production program. Um, and your professors or your instructors at college are seeing your skill within Flash and sort of encouraging you to double down on that, saying, you really are a bit bit better than the rest of the class at picking this up. And it's this perfect melding of film, sound, art, design, and technology, bringing it all together. And so you've got this set. So I assume make your you graduate from the college program. Where do you go from there? Do you freelance? Do you find a job right away? How does this next transition play out?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as part of, I don't know if it's any college courses, but this specific course that I was in, we had an internship. I believe it
Okay.
was at the end of second year, and I landed my internship in this travel company, part of their marketing department. And it was one of those other scenarios where I've had more, I guess, of a personal feeling about the place. There wasn't anything super exciting tech related, but I kind of liked I think he was a manager or a director of the marketing
Okay.
department at that point. So he also went to Humber, so we had that
Yeah.
in common. And he was just like a cool dude, And
Yeah.
I think like you'll see that a lot since we're talking about the progression of my career. That to me, personal relationship mean a lot, right? Where
Yeah.
it's important to enjoy people you work with. So I
Right.
think my internship was definitely that, where I saw mentor type of a person in that in that manager or marketing department. So I ended up doing my internship there, and it was mostly HTML, CSS. I've done a little bit of Flash because I said that I'm interested in it. So back then, having Flash on any website was okay. Let's just say
Yeah.
that, right? Not those like fully featured Flash websites where you can't skip intros, but you could use Flash a little bit more professionally, where it's like little widgets and stuff like that.
Right.
And they're also doing quite a bit of code fusion. I'm sure you don't hear that a lot on
Not
the
anymore.
podcast.
No.
Not
Yeah.
anymore, yeah. That was 2008, I guess, in my defense. But to be honest, I don't have any regrets about any technologies I've worked with.
No.
I
I
think
Yeah.
there's a place for everything. So Cold Fusion is kind of interesting. I'm not going to do a Cold Fusion pitch here, but I find
Yeah.
it a little ironic that it was very similar to what React or Angular looks nowadays, because it was literally that. It was like combining your markup with logic, like quite literally. It looks like Svelte or Vue in very many forms. But anyway, so yeah, I
Well,
got
that's really interesting. Was Cold Fusion its own language, or did it use what was it a combination of like a JavaScript and HTML? So I am not that familiar with it, but I certainly heard the name back at the time.
gotcha. It's more like that .NET. So
Okay.
it's its own thing. It's totally backend that is kind of like, I guess, server-side rendered pages. If we talk about it in our current language, it's owned by Adobe.
Yeah.
So it's quite proprietary, which can be hit and miss, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because you mentioned Dreamweaver previously, and that kind of goes very in parallel to me with Cold Fusion, because
Right.
just like Dreamweaver it was trying to shoot for the stars, but it fell somewhere like very far from the stars. I'm sure they're what they wanted to achieve with that WYSIWYG was commendable, but I think like you already mentioned that HTML that I was generating wasn't the greatest. And to your point, yeah, it probably didn't matter at the time because we didn't really care about semantic HTML. That was a bit of a problem with Cold Fusion too. Whenever you deal with proprietary technology, um, you are at the mercy of that proprietary technology.
Right.
So surprisingly, it was a little buggy at times, right? And because it's not open source, you can't just fix it
Right.
on the go, right? So it was kind of like hit and miss with Cold Fusion. But yeah, not to go too deep into it, that's what it was.
Yeah.
It's kind of like .NET, I guess, as a platform, and it just was server side stuff. But it was cool experience for me because I didn't really get into too much of backend. So that was my first flavor of backend, because I had to learn a bit of SQL. I had to learn just how backend works, right? Because if you think about it, it doesn't really matter too much what language or what stack you're using. Backend comes with its own paradigms, I would say, right? Like
Yep.
how you work with these things. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. But even back then, it wasn't something that was very marketable as a skill, to be honest. I know that in US, for some reason, cold fusion, at least back in the day, was more popular. Canadian companies weren't really exactly looking for cold fusion.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, so like maybe just to move on from that,
Yeah.
um, I didn't stay too long in that company for that reason exactly, because I wanted to do Flash, and I was also, I'm fresh out of school, and the last thing I want to do is kind of get stuck somewhere where I'm not growing as a developer.
Right.
Because it was a very small team at the end of the day. The mentorship that I've got was fantastic, but also felt like, I want more of developer experience with other developers, and I was pretty much like
Yes.
the
Yeah.
only person on the team. So I was craving that, and I really wanted to do Flash development. So yeah.
So you said you were in 2000, we were in 2008-ish at the
Mhm.
time.
Yep.
And did you make it 6 months? Did you make it a year? And where did you go next?
Okay, now you're just asking me to to remember things that I don't remember.
Well, that's okay. You
Let's
can,
just say a year and a half approximately. Yeah,
okay.
I don't remember my my stints to, let's
Yeah.
just say a year. I spent like a year in that place for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And where did you get to next? And I think we understand the reasons that you were looking, but how did that one come about? If it was through any sort of, was it just resume papering constantly, or how did you find your next step?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think that was the first time where my regular formula to seeking jobs kind of stayed, if not the same, but it was um, a starter template of that. And that is um, start learning something
Right.
that you want to do. So I had a bit of an exposure to Flash, but it was not a Flash program in college, right? So we only had maybe one or two classes. So that's when also AS3 came out, ActionScript 3. So we didn't dive too deep into it, right? So that's what I did. I bought a book, not a course online, but an actual physical book with, it was, I think I remember to this day, called Essential Action Script. Fantastic book. I read it cover to cover. I'm sure I didn't understand a lot of things because again, I don't come from programming background.
Yeah.
Um, but
And
yeah,
programming books are often like as thick as your head too, right? So
yeah, you're
yeah.
like showing the first chapter of that book, pretty much.
That's yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
like, especially at that time. At that time,
Yeah.
just a phone book would be small compared to these things. So
I'm joking. It was actually like that size, like yeah, like you
yeah.
showed. So it took me a while to get through it because it was obviously like parallel to my full-time work, but I got through it, and yeah, I applied to a couple of places, and I believe that specific position, I don't want to lie, I don't think I applied to it. It was through a recruiter, right? So I
Okay.
found a recruiter, and I specifically told him I'm looking for Flash positions
Yep.
because that was 2009. So people listening to you don't think I'm crazy that I'm looking for Flash positions in
Yeah.
2021.
Yeah.
It was 2009, so there were plenty of Flash positions, or at least a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, so eventually I landed a place. I landed a job at a place that was, I guess you can refer to it as a boutique agency,
Okay.
and they were doing Flash. So that was my next gig.
Okay. And yeah, that was a really fascinating insight that I just want to take a second to highlight
Yeah.
was, and you said you've sort of created this paradigm for yourself where if you want a new job, you go and learn the job in your spare time and then start applying for it. That was
Yeah.
that was really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that from anyone else before, and so that's really cool. So you're at the boutique agency. We're about 2009, and how long does this one last, and what is the work life like in this time period?
Similar to startups, so pretty busy. It's a
Yeah.
small place, about 6 people, all very lovely people. We had 2 or 3 Flash developers and I think 2 or 3 backend developers. So pretty cool work as well, because they had their own internal CMS, I guess. I wouldn't say
Okay.
framework, but it's not quite a
Yeah.
framework, but like a CMS that did a very clever way of dealing with Flash websites being somewhat not accessible.
Yeah.
Even back in the day, you don't really have any crawlers that go through the Flash website. So the way their CMS worked is that it would output all the HTML. It's not actually readable on the page. And then it also connects to Flash, I think, XML files. I don't remember exact tech right now. I
Yeah,
know it
that's
wasn't like
okay.
an API or anything like that. So yeah, so they had a lot of like very cool internal tools from the PHP side of things and combining it with Flash. They had their own like Flash library. Um, so yeah, it was very kind of tight knit place. I really learned a ton working in that place, not just from working on Flash perspective, but just how to be better developer and
Yeah.
how to work with other developers. That was probably the first time that I learned. It wasn't even Git at the time, it was SVN.
SVN.
So
Yes.
working with source control, I understand the purpose of it, but it's also can be kind of like, why do I need to do this? So it's like one of those things where with Git, for example, you can't just half-ass it, right? Like you
Right.
can't just like, I'll commit some things to Git and not commit other things. It just doesn't work that way, right? So
Yeah.
it was a great experience for me, like to learn how to work with source control. And from what I remember, SVN can be a little bit more finicky than Git. I think Git is easier to like do all like merge conflict and other conflict resolution. SVN was a lot of like, hey, can someone help me, please?
Yeah.
Those situations there. But
If
yeah,
I
it was,
remember, yeah, if I remember SVN, my biggest concern with it was the amount of file storage you needed to, and I might not remember this correctly, but I think every check-in for SVN was the entire file possibly, whereas Git is just the things that have changed on each of the individual files. So, and I'm not sure if that's true, but I think Git winds up being a much smaller file folder, so overall folder size overall, because they just play the change set versus the entire file.
yeah.
Um,
If I had
so
to prepare for my Git lecture, I would
yeah,
probably have I would have probably a better like answer
you'd
to
have a
that. I
better
remember
answer than that.
yeah, it
Yeah,
has something to do with like distributed versus non-distributed source
yeah.
control systems, and I believe
Okay.
SVN is non-distributed. So the purpose of Git is exactly what you said, right? It just first off keeps track of like the actual change diffs, which
Yeah.
like saves a ton of space, but it's also distributed or non-distributed. So for anyone watching, I promise I prepare for my lectures better than that.
Right.
So
Okay.
one of those, but the purpose of it is that like everybody has a copy. With SVN,
Yeah.
I think like it's just a singular place where it ended
Yeah.
up, like you said, being like way too blown out. Yeah, so Git is definitely taken over the source control for a
Yeah.
reason, because I think it's a
Yeah.
much more elegant solution. But yeah,
Yeah.
we used SVN back then, and yeah, you'd be actually surprised what kind of websites we built. There were actually a lot of very cool clients as well. So I learned quite a bit about interactivity, animation, and design and UX when I was in that position, because again, I worked with such a small team that it wasn't a huge hierarchy. It was just
Right.
me working with my design director sitting like side by side. So
Yeah.
I learned quite a bit about, how to tweak animations, what feels natural, what feels organic. And I really took that too hard in all of my other positions after that.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're there. We've learned. We've sort of had that collaborative work feeling, and we get the itch again. Do you have something else you want to learn, and you start teaching yourself, or how do you move into this next phase?
I'm smiling because it wasn't so much of an itch, it was more of a panic because that's when iPhone comes out and Steve
Yes.
Jobs single-handedly murders Flash.
Yep.
And then in retrospect, it made sense. I think back in
Yeah.
the day, it was a little bit of hurt feelings because we genuinely loved Flash. I genuinely loved Flash. So yeah, it wasn't really my first job switch where I could have prepared for looking for my next position because I was really enjoying working in a company. I was really enjoying working with Flash, but I also realistically understood that Steve
It
Jobs
was
had
going.
a point. Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's something to it. And I always kept an eye on HTML and CSS and JS because I've done that before, right? I wasn't just a Flash developer. I had
Yep.
exposure to the whole like HTML, CSS, JS stack. So I've seen what HTML was starting to get capable of. But I've also been a Flash developer. So to me, I thought, everything to a carpenter looks like you can fix it with a with
Yes.
a hammer and a nail, right? So to
Yeah.
me, I'm like, why would you want to do this HTML5 thing? Flash is so much better, kind of thing, without realizing the full
Yeah.
strength of HTML5.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of start learning a bit more about HTML5 and CSS. I guess at that point, JS wasn't where it is right now. So I think the first wave of HTML empowerment was HTML5 and CSS3, really,
Right.
which still came with amazing stuff. If I remember correctly, it was CSS animations, which were like, whoa, mind blowing, because Flash is one of those things that can be pretty non-performant. That was another like
Right.
problem with Flash. I'll be as much as I love Flash to this day, it's like, let's be real, it used to bleed memory, so you have to be careful with it and stuff like that. And all of a sudden you have something that's like native to the browser. Again, to
Yep.
compare it to Flash, it's a plugin for those who don't know, because I think we don't even have it anymore, right? Like,
Well, and there's so much really just wonderful, creative, artistic content that's like lost. Like how are you gonna see Flash stuff nowadays? I don't know if people have archived it or if we have virtual machines where we can browse through this historical period of creativity, because there were some wonderful things that happened in Flash. And anyways, so HTML, yeah, and HTML5 and the CSS3. And I mean, if you look nowadays at what they're doing in that space, it's just even the next level beyond that. So, and so you are training up, learning up, and you move on to another agency, or
it's a couple of interviews. I'm looking for a place that would have that opportunity as well, because it's an interesting, it's I don't know, it's like not trying to jump on a missing train or leaving train. I don't know
yeah,
what's the opposite of that, like the train that didn't come yet. Like, I see the potential and I'm like, I need to be there, kind of a thing, right? So that was my next move. Is I get it, I understand what HTML CSS is trying to do. I need to learn it right now, right? But not just kind of like learn on my own time, but preferably do it professionally as well. So yeah, so that was my job search, essentially just trying to find something that's going to be working with those technologies. So I was looking for that, and I got hired in a place that we're doing. I don't know if we're naming companies here. We'll just keep it, I guess, more abstract. So it was a pharma company that were doing a lot of like medical illustrations. So
okay,
they were using HTML, CSS, JS for that, for iPad specifically, because that's, I think, where the whole Steve Jobs thing really comes in, right? That he didn't just
right,
say, Flash is kind of like never going to be supported by Apple devices, but it was, what's the alternative then, right? And he said, we have this browser stuff that's going to be an alternative, which I just had like a little like flashback where I find that a little ironic because that was their first thing that they actually supported HTML and CSS, and that's not the case nowadays. I believe up to this day they are much more into native as king kind of thing.
Yeah.
But their first iteration was they were really supporting HTML and CSS. So really, if you wanted to do bleeding edge of that, it would be iPad. So that worked perfectly for me because I got to do a bit of HTML and CSS, and it was mostly these interactive applications on iPad.
Okay.
But remember, everything has this thread through my career. Remember the Cold Fusion. So
Yeah.
part of that company, they were kind of split into these two companies, the main one, and then a sister company being more of a startup that dealt in an education space. And that whole platform was built in Cold Fusion. So they probably wouldn't hire me. I don't know. I don't want to speak for them. I'm sure I was very impressive during the interview, but I'm sure it was very much so a little check mark here that I actually knew Cold Fusion, because as you can imagine, there's not that many people who actually do Cold Fusion. And it was, from what I understand, it was strictly by chance that their platform was built in Cold Fusion. It's just like ended up being that way. So I was able to help them with Cold Fusion. I was able to help them with Flash because a lot of their applications used Flash as well. So it was just kind of, I have knowledge of Cold Fusion and Flash, and then they are working currently on HTML. So I want this, and they want this from me. So that was, I think.
Okay, so yeah, so it was this very symbiotic relationship, right? So it's, you know, they have the things that you want to learn, and you have the things that they want to backfill, and so you can both mutually benefit from each other.
Yeah.
Okay, and we must be closing in on the time when you get to click. Is that you? Do you go from here to click, or is there anything else in between? Or are there what are the interesting things that you're picking up about HTML5 over this time? Or HTML in general, I guess. I mean, it doesn't have to be 5, but
yeah, it was 5.
yeah.
Mostly. Yeah, I don't necessarily have much insight from that period in time, to be honest. So yeah, I oddly don't remember many of big projects that I worked on. I'll explain why. So because it was this like split in the companies, they had a lot of developers that were doing iPad development, and I was doing a lot of work with the Cold Fusion and basically on that like second platform. So I ended up moving more into that role, not necessarily by choice, but I didn't really like. It's not that someone forced me to do, right? We always make our own decisions. So it's just the decision was sort of, you know, I stay in this place and I see where it goes. And I stayed at that place, but ended up doing a bit more. I think it was more, the role was more leading the dev team, which wasn't too big, but I got to learn how to work with interns. We've had like 3 or 4 interns that were joining us. So that was kind of interesting, especially because it was a huge challenge for me. I was pretty fresh out of school still, right? I know that I've had a couple of other gigs, but it was all somewhat lateral moves, right? It wasn't just like progression. Like I'm doing PHP and I'm becoming an intermediate PHP developer, and no hate on PHP. I'm just picking it as a random language that I could have done, right? It was more of like, okay, I started with Cold Fusion and some HTML, moved into Flash. Okay, Flash is murdered, backstabbed, whatever. So I'm moving more into like HTML role. So it was a little bit like I felt like it was moving laterally a bit. So it was interesting to have that role of a mentor to an extent, because it was faking it a little bit till you make it kind of situation.
Yeah.
But it was a great learning experience as well.
So you are you're actually in this time period, you're starting to experience your first management type responsibilities, or at least mentorship responsibilities.
You could say that, yeah. Like
Yeah.
if I think about it, you're right. Yeah, like technically you are managing interns, you're giving them
Yeah.
work. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Okay. And so, actually, so I think before we move on from this, then there are some interesting questions about what maybe you learn about managing people during this time. Are there any things that come out, like how do you do that job? What makes a manager?
Yeah. Um, what makes a pretend manager? Let's start
Yeah,
there.
okay. I mean,
Yeah,
we can talk about imposter syndrome too, but you are de facto their manager.
that's very true. Yeah. Um, this is going to be an old tale where I just keep saying, well, my memory is pretty bad, but I'm pretty sure I can distill a couple of things from that. I
Yeah.
think the biggest thing whenever you work with any developers, I think, is it never scales linearly, right? Whenever you have another developer, it's not going to be double the work power. That's, I think,
Excellent.
one of the
Excellent.
first
Yes.
lessons that we all learn at some point, right? That and a great not to take it into a side note, but great product and project managers, they know that, right? That you can't just throw more developers at a project. So that was a big learning experience for me, that I've had a lot of things that I was supposed to be working on, and having an intern that you have to take care of. First of all, it's a lot of responsibility, right? So all of a sudden, you're not just responsible for your output, and you're not just responsible for someone else's output. There's a whole other level to it, right? They're doing that from very much so educational perspective, right? Where they're supposed to gain something from this internship. So it's this weight on your shoulders that you're not just teaching them something, but it needs to be something beneficial. And a lot of that can be, we as developers can sometimes, I think, have this tunnel vision that what we're working on is not as cool as that other thing. The grass is greener.
Yeah.
So being able to distill that of, well, it doesn't have to be super interesting. You sort of have to abstract yourself away and see that the work can be actually interesting. You just have been doing it for long enough time that it seems like, well, that's just a casual thing, and the student is not going to be like super interested in that. So I think, yeah, that whole level of prioritization, making sure that you have enough work for those people, and also that they're engaged and they're learning something, that was a huge balancing act for me. That was the biggest thing that I think I had to learn, of being available, managing my own stress, being able to be approachable, I think, is also very important, because we can always be very heads down, and especially if like you're struggling with your own bug and you're like, hey Daniil, can you help me? And you're like, deep breath, and it's like, yeah, what's up, what's going on, let me help you, kind of thing, right? So it's very important, because I think you can be very reactive. I speak for myself as a person. I tend to wear my heart on the sleeve, so sometimes it can be difficult to maintain that balance of um, being like genuine with someone, but also making sure that you're not expressing your own frustration on people who probably would benefit, seeing that this environment is not that stressful, just because you can be stressed for whatever other reasons.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good. I think you would find a lot of people actually do identify with that feeling of conflict, internal conflict between trying to get the one thing that the one hard thing you're trying to focus on, while simultaneously making sure that we're not leaving our colleagues and and again the learning developers, not leaving them behind to struggle through this. Because
Mhm.
and I think I think there's also a bit of self-interest that happens in
Mhm.
that space as well, because who does it fall on if the learning developer doesn't get their work done? It comes back to you in anyways at the end of the day in many of these cases, or it comes back to the project, in which case it comes back to you too. So there really is a mix of um, there's a mix of self-interest, but there's also sometimes these problems that we're struggling with are multi-day problems as well. And
Mhm.
so it really is tough to pull yourself out of something like that. Um, I
Yeah, it's
think
a very good
I
way to put it. Yeah.
yeah, I think you would I think you would find a lot of people actually identify with that problem. Or I don't know, problem isn't quite the right word for it, but just this situation. So
Balance, yeah, balance or
the
challenge of it all.
yeah, challenge, yeah, the
Yeah.
challenge, the balance, that's good. Um, so you're you're effectively managing or pretend managing, and you're deep into cold fusion, you want to learn the HTML, and so I'm going to assume that you start saying, well, I've got to find a shop that doesn't have cold fusion. Or what makes you start getting the itch again?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. I think it was this feeling almost like that I'm feeling again that am I really do I really know everything, right? I think that was
Right.
also like I never, maybe not never, but like I haven't thought of it in a long time. But you actually made me think of it that way since you asked about this technically being a manager role, right? I didn't even put two and two together where that possibly have been this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, right? That it's like, who am I? Maybe it's an imposter syndrome to an extent,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
who am I to lead these people if I feel like I didn't get my mentorship, right? And I love
Yeah.
how you said that we always probably have our own personal reasons behind it, right? Like it's not about selfishness, never. I think it's more about you have to, it's it's going to sound very cliche, right? But the whole thing with you have to put a, if you were in a plane crash, you have to put on your oxygen
Your
mask
own
first.
mask first. Right.
Exactly, right. So
Right.
it's like the same thing here. It's like, who am I to be this um, defining role to an extent to these learning developers if I myself feel like I haven't gotten my side of mentorship, right? Because it was more of the same. Like if you think about all the at this point three places that I worked at, first place I was pretty much the only developer, and I learned what I could from there. In the Flash developer position, I've also been part of a very small, tight knit group of developers that were also very concentrated on a specific technology. And then this is my third place where, again, I kind of starting to gain this more of senior manager, pretend manager role, however you want to call it. So yeah, I'm feeling this each more of maybe not get away from cold fusion, but see how else it's done, you know, where
Right. Okay. Yes.
I could have done more of research and like doing more of whatever up and coming HTML, CSS, whatever it is. To be honest, I don't think I've had great manager for that position. So it wasn't really about me feeling like I don't have a say. It was probably me more questioning myself, where it's not that I don't have a say, I just don't know what to say at times, right? Where it's
Right.
like, and at this point, I think a lot in later years now, I know there's answer to that in a different format where you can do self learning and work on your own projects, but that's very tangential. I'm sure we're going to get to that point. So let's just stick um, to my job history. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think I was feeling a combination of things, right? Cold fusion, never really wanted to do it because it's not exactly very marketable,
Yep.
which in itself probably says quite a bit that, I haven't felt like that place. I'm just going to stay there for a long time. Um, but also, I've I think like throughout years, I realized that it's okay in tech to change positions if you feel like you're not growing. I don't want to
Right.
make it sound like tech is like this unique unicorn of an industry, but I think that there needs to be this understanding that it's okay for not students, it's
Yeah.
okay for people, students as well, by the way.
Yeah.
It's okay for people to outgrow a specific position, and we shouldn't feel kind of like sour about it, right? Like,
Right.
um, yeah, I think that's where I I was there. So I wanted to be a bit more in the midst of other developers and just gain more knowledge, work on maybe variety of projects as well. I don't think at
Yeah.
that point I was too ready to work on the product because that's essentially what I was doing. I
Yeah.
was working on the same thing and I had to come up with maybe my own decisions and imposter syndrome, feeling like who am I to decide the architecture of this? Like it was just like
Right.
pretty big weight on me. So yeah, so I started looking for something that
So, and you went looking at this point for someplace a lot bigger. Is that?
it ended up being that way. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
don't know if it was like a cognizant thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ended up joining a consultancy slash digital agency place at that point. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, I actually want to start getting to the teaching stuff. So maybe we can, unless is there anything that's particularly stand out along these ones that you can think of? What are the highlights of these things?
Yeah, I think it's perfect time to actually talk about teaching. Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Because I think definitely part of it, of course, comes back to me enjoying working with interns, right? So I would say
Yeah.
that that's a good starting point there. But it actually really blossoms, I would say, in that next position that I joined, this consultancy place, where as part of their professional development, you needed to do kind of like knowledge sharing, right? And
Okay.
I found that I really enjoyed doing technical talks and doing like lunch and learns and preparing for them. And then we had our own group of interactive developers because that was my role. So we had our internal presentations, and I've really enjoyed doing that. They also had their own sort of like internal boot camp of grads joining the company. So I did talks. I mean, I was a front end developer at that point, so just like talking about different front end ish topics to them. And I really, really like that. I'm one of those weird people who actually enjoys public speaking.
Right.
So that was always kind of like interesting to me. And then to move on from that position, that's when my next place was Click, which I think was
Okay.
a little bit more heads down.
Yeah.
And I don't believe I did anything like specific in Click that was related to um, presentations. Oh no, I believe I did. I did something for Vue or React, something like that.
Okay.
Um, but haven't had too much opportunities with that. But then the
Yeah.
next place after Click, it was a product company, and
Okay.
we at that point I was a senior engineer, and we had a team of more junior people. So that's
Okay.
where I think this more one-on-one mentorship really started to speak to me, right? So
Yeah.
before that, it was more of just doing lunch and learns and like doing
Yeah.
presentations, and I enjoy it. But then once I had to mentor people, that's where it was more of oh, this is kind of like interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
you play a role in actually um, helping other people gain knowledge and fix
Right.
their problems, and it feels kind of nice from that perspective. for sure.
Okay. And so when you got to the product company and you're doing this senior engineer stuff, is this when you start making decisions about which frameworks are going to be used? Are you doing front end
Mm.
engineering or back end engineering? What's going on in this space here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think um, it, well, I can't speak, of course, for other companies, so I'm just going to speak for that company.
Sure.
It was pretty well established at that point. So I would say
Okay.
that all of the um, all of the style guides and architectural decisions were kind of predefined, especially because it's a product, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of want to make sure that everything is going to be consistent. So there wasn't too much from very high level architecture perspective, but I definitely was part of having these conversations of what should be kind of like additional software that's being added to it. So I was there for a year and a half, I think. So in that time, we've had conversations specifically about storybook versus some other thing I don't remember. So that's basically,
Okay. And for my understanding, what is Storybook?
yeah, I was just gonna get to it. So
Okay.
it's it's kind of like a component um documentation. I'm sure
Okay.
there's an official name for it, but you can think of it as kind of like a wiki for your components, right? So, like if you work in React, you're probably going to end up having these reusable components. So on
Okay.
your projects, you don't want to create, 10 million different buttons, right? Like your UX needs to work with the same type of a button. And then I'm just taking an example of a very small
Mm-hmm.
component, right? You end up with something more complex. So that's what storybooks helps you with, is to basically generate this library of your components that can be viewed by UX designers and other
Okay.
people on the team. So it's essentially documentation for your component based design. Yeah.
That's actually sounds pretty interesting. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
Now, and then is at the end of this senior engineering stint, is this where you move into BrainStation?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
my next place. Yeah.
Okay. And so, what has teaching been like for you?
If you don't mind, maybe we can quickly talk about like this whole progression, because I think
Of
there was one
course.
thing that I
Yeah.
wanted to
Yeah.
to bring up. I know that it's like a very open-ended conversation, but on the back of
Yeah.
my mind is like there's one thing that I really want to talk about, that if it
Yeah.
helps anyone like it helped me, I think it would be beneficial. And that is just talking about burnout. And I'm not gonna go like super
Oh,
deep
good.
into it.
Wonderful.
I'm not
Yes.
gonna go too like sappy about it. I'm
Yeah.
actually gonna talk about it from a very positive perspective. So throughout this whole journey, right? So like from my high school, whenever you want to do it, from graduation from college to BrainStation, that's 10 years, right? So I
Yes.
I know Alex did a good job of like walking me very quickly through this, or probably not super quickly, but that's 10 years. And in those 10 years, I think I've had freak out moments about like, am I even like in the right place? Am I like doing like what am I doing kind of situation? Like I would
Yeah.
say I remember three very distinct moments where I wanted to just do something else. And sometimes there were reasons for it, sometimes there are no reasons for that. But the reason I bring it up now is at every point I felt that there's something that brings me back. And I think the point that I'm really trying to emphasize here is that it's okay to feel like you don't belong sometimes. I
Yeah.
think, and there might be just a lot of reasons for that. Personally, I think it's just the overwhelming nature of this industry.
Yeah.
There's just so much to learn constantly.
Yeah.
And as much as you try to be grateful to where we're at, and I think we're uh, in a very good industry compared to some other places. And of course, this is not all rosy colored. There's a lot of problems in diversity side of things, and just representation. in the industry. I don't want to diminish all of these things, but if we
Right.
just take a look at it from, I think, very high level perspective, like it's a very privileged place, and I recognize that I'm in a
Yeah.
very privileged place, but at the same time, it's no walk in the park. And maybe like I started realizing that a bit more when I became an educator, that you really have to want to be in this. You really have to love what you're doing to actually push through it. You
Right.
can't like, we all I hope everybody who's in this industry, they're well paid, well taken care of, and that's all fantastic. But if you're strictly doing it for the money, you're just going to burn out so quickly. And I don't think I've ever done that. um, but yeah, there was always something that brought me back to it. And burnout, I don't know if you want to talk about it like
I
later.
do. I would love to. I mean,
Yeah,
I wasn't planning on having a therapy session for myself, but holy geez, you just spoke to my soul. So tell me then. So here we are. You're a senior engineer. You're involved in this product. There's probably a high rate of churn. So are you telling me that you burnt out at this spot?
that was one of the bigger burnout moments that I felt for sure. And this is no, well, I'm not naming places, but it doesn't
Yeah.
even matter because it's a strictly personal thing. I don't think
Right.
there's anything that there is to blame in terms of, oh, the company did that to me. It's never about that. You might have people who thrive in that. I used to be that person. I've done,
Yeah.
80-hour weeks, and then also do a hackathon on the weekend, and
Yeah.
I love every minute of that, right? But then uh, in my 30s, my priorities shift, right? My
Yeah.
relationship is a lot more important to me, and you just kind of start recognizing that, maybe you have only a limited time on earth whenever
Yeah.
people recognize it.
Yeah.
I recognize it in my 30s, again, not from a negative perspective, but just like there's got to be more to it. And yeah, so I think that it's a very subjective thing. A lot of people live and breathe code. Here's another thing that I'd love to share is that I very often felt like I don't belong because you meet these people. You meet people who just code day and night. And I was pretty much always that person that loves his full-time job. But then
Yeah.
when I go home, I want to, I don't know, watch YouTube, play
Yeah.
video games, I don't know, make music, do something else, play instruments, whatever it is, take a walk in the park, pet my cat. But it wasn't that like I want to come home and do coding. But then
Yeah.
you meet people like that, right? The whole concept of like 10x engineers. Some people are like that. But like, what do you do if you don't feel that way? What do
Right.
you like? I not a good engineer? Am I not a good developer because I'm not in it fully? And I think it brings up a lot of self doubt, and I don't
Yeah.
know if it's a necessary self doubt because, from my perspective, and this might be subjective, but it is my perspective, and I think that works for me. That I recognize that having time off, having time for other things to do, not only not make you a worse engineer, but it actually helps you think in a much more broad spectrum, which I think is
Right.
very, very helpful. I find doing things that are more creative is a wonderful substitute, not substitute, but a wonderful complementary thing to coding. I think like music, for example, you start recognizing patterns, for example. But even more importantly, like if you don't do anything, okay, that's fine. The main point that I think I want to make is working those 80-hour weeks, it just catches up with you, right? Because
It does.
I know I'm
It
kind of
does.
like jumping back and forth, but I promise this is all about burnout. And that is just your human body, I don't think, is capable of doing it for a prolonged period of time. Maybe when we're
Right.
younger, it takes you longer time to realize that, and like that feeling of burnout to catch up with you. But if it inevitably it does. And the older I got, the the faster that kind of becomes.
That turns around. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. but
Absolutely.
but I think it's not just about working long hours or working a lot. It almost sometimes becomes about the the place that you work at. Like I started putting a lot more emphasis on who am I working with, and that has nothing to do with people I worked with, but with me again, that I need a specific environment to work in. And that's another thing that can, I think, bring self-doubt sometimes, because you feel like, well, everybody else gets along, right? So like, what is wrong
Yeah.
with you, kind of thing. And it's just because, well, that's just not your dynamic. And that's just so important, I think, to have a good dynamic on your team where you're like, you really gel with people. Yeah, the people element in tech, I'm sure it's not overlooked. And my cat wants to say hi.
Oh,
um
hi, Kitty.
um the people element is not overlooked, I'm sure, but I think it's just a very important aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if the not if you don't feel a deep social connection with your colleagues, your work colleagues, does that further contribute to imposter syndrome, as the fact that maybe you're sitting there, you're coding away, and there are three people in the pod over there, and they're laughing and getting along, and you're just sitting there, kind of alone, kind of disconnected, kind of an outsider, tapping away and doing your stuff, but you aren't part of the in group, and does that contribute to the and I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
answer, but if
Yeah.
I'm trying to hear what you're saying and think about my under, because I mean, certainly I don't know if we all feel this way, but I certainly feel apart from my colleagues from time to time. And so I wonder about that. Made that Thank you for prompting thoughts. You've once again these interviews can have the effect of leaving me speechless sometimes. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't know answers to that. It's a very
Yeah,
good point, Alex. And I think it's just like you saying that sometimes you might feel a little bit more distance. I love that, right? Because it's like it's never going to be a constant thing. Sometimes you feel more social, sometimes there might be
yeah,
so many different things going on in your life. And I think
yeah,
like what that makes me think is there's a lot of emphasis on companies being families, and that's
yeah,
fantastic when it works out. But I think the reality of it, you you can overdo that to an extent,
yeah. And
because
if you're not feeling like a family at the moment, does that further exacerbate this feeling of failure? Because
mhm,
yeah, that's an excellent point. We're not family, we are coworkers. I have a
yeah,
family, and there's a photo
right,
of them on the wall, and
right,
like, let's get this straight, people. um so
yeah,
I mean, that's a very, that's just some those are some really good thought questions, and we're not here for answers today, but they are
yeah,
things to discuss and think about over time, to say, is anyways. So we're we're in this spot. We've got those feelings of burnout. The teaching, did you go seeking the teaching career? Did you suddenly have an epiphany one day where you said, no, it's the teaching that I love? Or was that a recruiter said, hey, why don't you look at BrainStation? How did that come into your life?
yeah. So I can walk you through what happened after that little mental breakdown of mine.
Yeah.
I quit my job without seeking another job because I just
Okay,
wanted
brave.
to have uh, a break.
Yeah,
I was just tired. I realized that for those 10 years that I mentioned, between the jobs, between like the time out that I took, I've had maybe 2 months, and that's in 10
right.
years that I was just working back to back, back to back. And that goes back to like burnout can be not just working long hours. The
Yeah,
company was very, very much so like good work and life balance, but that wasn't enough. I just had this mental uh I don't want to call it mental breakdown. It means a lot more than what I've had, right? So I don't want to
right.
speak for people who actually struggle with that, but I've had a very existential crisis, I think is a fair
Right.
thing to say, where it's like,
Okay.
what am I doing? Did I actually ever take time for myself? And I just was tired. I know it sounds like nothing, right? Because like, oh, I'm tired. I hope it comes the weekend. I hope the
Yeah.
weekend comes. But it was not. I was just like, I'm just
It's deeper
tired.
than that.
I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
tired. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was my feeling. Like you're sitting at your computer one day, and sometimes you're like, I can't do this anymore. You go home and you're fine, right? And
Yeah.
that's great. My situation was I can't do this anymore. And I talked to my manager. I'm like, I'm very sorry. I'm giving you a 1 month notice. I can't
Yeah.
do this anymore. It's not about you. It's not about the company. This is me. I'm like done at this moment. I'm
Yeah.
sure like and in some time maybe we can like reconvene, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very
Yeah.
difficult conversation to have. But at the
Yeah.
same time, when I did, I felt right. So there must be something right about that, right? Even
Yeah.
though it's like terrifying, because yeah, I don't consider that a brave decision. It's a very dumb decision. I don't recommend anyone doing this because
Yeah.
it actually does not look good on your resume. It's just not a good move. But it was a good move for me as a
Yeah.
person, not professionally. I wasn't thinking about it. Just me as Daniil as a person. I was just like, I need this. So yeah, I gave my 1 month notice. I think I did a decent job of wrapping up things that I needed to wrap up, and then it wasn't on purpose, but I had vacation scheduled at the time when I quit. So I've had vacation
Right.
scheduled before, and just because I always tried to do something for my birthday and my partner's birthday. So that was my birthday coming up. I had vacation pre-planned, but it just ended up being my existential crisis coincided with my birthday. Maybe that has something to do with that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and so what was this the one where you turned 30 or 31? Was it a milestone or was it just
I'm actually joking. No,
Oh, okay.
I don't like my birthdays, but not to that extent.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I went on vacation. I ended up going to Japan, which was very lovely,
Cool.
and it was
Wonderful.
very, very good time to just think things through, I'm sure. And um, I think before I left for Japan, I was just looking for like I was just looking around. I wasn't necessarily job searching. But you asked this question of like why BrainStation?
Yeah.
So I think before I left, so it's kind of interesting when you quit your job, you're kind of in that mentality of you're still obviously going to work, and like I said, I wasn't slacking off or anything. I appreciated the company for everything they've done for me. So I put in my effort, but you still have a different mentality.
Yes.
You're still
Yes.
kind of like looking forward to things. So I was thinking like what next kind of thing. Like what is it that I want to do? And that's where the whole mentorship thing came to place, where I really wanted to maybe downshift a little bit, so not concentrate maybe on the senior developer role, which is I don't know, kind of ironic. A lot of people just try to move up the ladder. I kind of wanted
Yeah.
to go down the ladder and like maybe mentor more junior developers, look something into that sort of a role, which I don't even know if that would exist. That's how naive my thinking was. But the other line of thinking was, what if I teach? And it was just
Yeah.
like immediately laughing at myself, right? It's like, well, what do you mean? You have no teaching background. But at
Right.
the same time, it's like, well, what am I trying to distill here, right? That I enjoy presentation, right? I enjoy like public speaking, I enjoy mentorship. Well, it sounds like kind of like an educator role, except that I'm not
Yeah.
an educator.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. So before I go on my trip, I look up, boot camps because I've
Yeah.
worked with boot camp grads and I've
They're
had
amazing. They're
very
incredible.
good. I've
They
exactly,
are
exactly. I've
just I mean, let me sing their praises to a T for the ones that have come to work with us. I mean, they are just these shining lights of energy and optimism and like uh, wow, right? Like wow, they're fantastic. Sorry, I mean, but they're great. They're
My
great.
thoughts
These
exactly. Yeah.
boot camps are a phenomenal addition to the industry.
I think it's a very Freudian slip because I'll be
Yeah,
honest. So as much as I want to sing praises and like I'll rep BrainStation, I don't get paid. Well, I get
yeah,
paid by BrainStation. I don't get
yeah,
extra paid by repping BrainStation. We can talk about it if you want to talk about it later. Um, but I actually had kind of a very split feeling about bootcamp grads.
yeah,
Um, that yes, like I completely like echo Alex's sentiment. That's like, holy cow, they're like so smart. How are they like so not just smart but driven, right?
yeah,
And I've always felt that I was a bit of like an old dog where I can be a bit grumpy and be like, oh, just do your job, kind of thing. Like, who
yeah,
cares which framework you're using on a bad day?
yeah,
I'm usually like better than this, and I'll be obviously like, okay, we need to write clean code, guys, please. But on a bad day, you'll be like, okay, who cares, kind of thing.
yeah.
You just ship it, right? Uh, yeah,
Ship it.
yeah. I'm also repping the podcast. Ship it. Yeah. Sometimes it's like you got to do it, right? And they're just like had so much energy. But the flip side of that, and it's not a negative thing, it's again like almost me being intimidated, is some of the bootcamp grads has had like way too much energy, and they're just kind of like, I know my shit. And I'm like,
Okay.
well, this is interesting because it's like, you start, your ego rises up, which is never
Yeah,
a good thing, but your ego kind of rises up, and it's like, well, you technically don't have as much experience as I do, excuse me very much, kind of a thing.
yeah,
But they're all very like bright people. So I was so
yeah,
curious of how does the sausage made, right? Like what is
yeah,
happening in those boot camps that you end up with these like fantastic people. So yeah, so I looked up boot camps in the area. I'll be honest, I probably didn't even do like research too much. And I applied to a couple of places that ended up having some positions just completely blindly, right? And I think in
yeah,
all of the um, job positions that are applied to, there's always going to be, if not cover letter, then at least like a little paragraph you're supposed to like say like why are you applying, like what makes
yeah,
you a better candidate. And I was just like a very honest me of like saying, because that sounds cool. I don't remember what I exactly said, but I was just like being honest where that would be so cool if I could do that.
yeah,
I would love to do this, and I think I would be good at it, kind of a thing, right? Like
yeah,
being confident but not cocky kind of situation.
yeah,
So when I was in while I was on my vacation, I actually heard from a couple of places, one of them being BrainStation, and they're like, hey, do a tech challenge for us. I'm like,
right.
actually, I'm on the train right now. I'm probably going to be for a while. Can we do that later? Which is usually you can't, because usually tech challenges, they're kind of very, especially if they're being sent out to you,
Yeah,
they're going to be very time locked, where it's like you need to do it in a specific amount of time. So I believe it wasn't just like, oh, we would like to send you a tech challenge. It was like, okay, next step, here's a tech challenge. So technically, I have that tech challenge in my email, if I remember the story correctly. And immediately I'm like, I'm actually not going to be able to do it for at least like 2 weeks. They
right.
were very cool about it. They're like, that's okay. Just let us know when you come back. And every step of the way, as I went through the interview, it was just, which if there's one advice that I can give, and I always give to my students, it's just always be yourself and have fun at the interviews,
Yeah,
because I literally just did that. I had zero expectation because I did not expect anything. I was
yeah.
just like,
It was from your perspective, if I'm hearing, you thought it was ludicrous that anybody would hire you to be a
exactly,
teacher. And
exactly,
so
yeah.
it's
Like, why are you talking to? I'm like, I'm the curious person. I'm like, why are
yeah,
you talking to me? Like, did you
yeah,
see my resume? I'm
yeah,
not a teacher. You got that, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
Daniil, did you spell my name correctly? It's not Daniel, like not that super cool guy who probably like has those what is those like plaid jackets with the
yeah,
leather.
yeah. The
Yeah,
elbow patches and
real
yeah,
deal, exactly. Yeah, I'm not
yeah,
that guy. Yeah. But no, they were super cool. And at every point I just had a chat. And it's like,
yeah,
how cool is that your interview is just having a chat? Like even the tech
yeah.
challenge was just, I had a chat about, how I would build this specific system. I'm not going to give away what's
Sure.
BrainStation tech challenge looks like. Um, yeah, it was just lovely. Very lovely people, very genuine. Everybody I've met And that just goes back, I think, like everything seems to be a bit of, coming back in circles for me in my career, is that it was just this genuine connection that I was looking for, right? That
Right, right.
not necessarily the
Yeah,
family, right? But I think what's important in a job is people working on the same goal. And
yeah,
yeah, that's something that I've definitely felt like and still feel like at a
yeah.
place. Like I
That's
definitely,
yeah. What's really interesting to me is in around 2000, I was at Nortel Networks, uh, I mean, the networking company. They had
mm,
130,000 odd employees, and
mm,
they eventually went bankrupt. And I was pulling, I wrote the database that laid people off. And
wow.
so it was this thing that you couldn't tell anyone around you that you were the technology behind the Grim Reaper. Um, and eventually I got laid off on my own, and I was completely burnt out on programming at that time.
Mm-hmm,
And there was this placement program where they say, because you've been laid off, you get your severance and you get training
mm,
on how to deal with being laid off. And one of the things that they say in these sessions is take this opportunity of being laid off to um, uh, think about what you really want to do with your life. So don't just go to the next programming job or the next scripting job or the next job firing people. Like, think about who you
yeah,
want to be.
yeah,
And
yeah.
at that time, it was around 2001 or something like that. I decided that after my previous 6 months or a year of doing this really grueling and emotionally draining work, that
Mm,
I wanted to build my life around total life happiness model, which
mm,
is find a job. And so that's when I actually went off and I trained to become a high school teacher, and I did that for about 5 years.
mm.
And so it was, and if I'm thinking about you're there, you're recounting your story of getting burnt out, and you say, well, why don't I just go be a teacher on the other side of this? And I'm really blown away to some extent how closely our two experiences are lining up.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I knew you were a teacher, but it's so cool
yeah,
to hear that story. Yeah.
yeah. And then you think you've got cocky kids who come in and say, like, I know everything. Try doing that with teenagers.
I can't imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just such a lovely role. It's such a lovely job. The kids are wonderful, even when they're yelling at you. But you don't get, I assume, you don't get people yelling at you, because these are, by and large, these are adults retraining to, or is that a correct assumption that they are adults retraining, or are they high school graduates going into an 8-week camp trying to get a job on the other side? What's the demographic of your student look like?
Around 30 years old, I think
Yeah.
our median demographic is. Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of funny you mentioning a high school student. We were all talking about it between the educators that one of our current cohorts has the first high school grad, and we're like, oh, that's pretty cool, because usually we get university grads, we get university dropouts,
Yeah.
and uh, I would say majority of students would be yeah, just realizing that what their careers are is not what they want to do for the rest of their lives, which I think is just something that you and I, again, we
Everybody gets this at some point, I
agree
imagine.
on that, right? Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
important to do something that's meaningful, and that's the most beautiful part of this job, I think, for me, is just see that passion and interest in people's eyes, and hearing these stories of serendipity, which I think I'm using that word correctly, of right, like things falling into place where
Yes. Yes.
it's just having this um, realization that, well, I've always enjoyed doing it, so why not kind of like try and do it
Why not
professionally?
get paid to do it?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I have like huge admiration for our students because
Yes.
it's terrifying to get into this program.
Yes.
And for anyone who might be interested in joining any boot camp, it's a grueling 12 weeks or 10
Yeah.
weeks, however big the program is. It's not an easy job, right? And we have a
Yeah.
lot of students who do it from scratch, and
Yeah.
it just blows my mind. It
Yeah.
took me what, 12 years? How long I've been doing it
That's
professionally?
right.
And I still feel like, I'm the dumb dumb that I used to be, and being able to like just jump into it and just say, you know what, I can do it. Huge
Yeah.
admiration. But
And they're putting so much on the line because these things aren't free in any way, shape, or form. The 12 weeks full-time study means not only are you paying a large sum, but you are unable to work in that time. And when you are 18, 19, early 20s, sort of these university ages, that's more understood. But if you are in your 30s and you're deciding to do this, you don't have your parents paying you rent anymore. You have to take a massive risk to go through and do this. I mean, assuming you graduate, assuming you're good, the salaries that people are receiving on the other sides of these boot camps. But they have to love technology if they're going through a boot. Well, maybe that's not true. Maybe some of them see the salaries and say, well, I could just go do that. It's way better than whatever I'm doing. But I mean, it's just such a risk. They're laying so much out on the line to, and while paying attention to something like the sunk cost fallacy. If you come out and you've got a degree in finance, and what are you doing? You go to a programming boot camp, so you're going to throw away your university. I mean, they don't. By and large, they use all of their education in their roles, but it's like, it's just it really is the people who do the boot camps are really, really impressive to me, in a lot of ways. And so why don't we talk about, because as I said, I was a teacher and I learned so many things from my students. What are the things, because you have a room full of people of all different ability levels and all different backgrounds and understandings. So there's somebody who might not even know how to open Visual Studio Code or whatever, they say, or I remember when I was teaching my adult course, I said, well, look at the menu. And one of them said, well, what's a menu? And it's like, so you have these and it makes perfect sense. I said, what do you mean, what's a menu? She says, well, if I go to a restaurant, a menu is a thing that I choose my food off of. So she's looking around for a menu on the desk. I said, oh no, it's these things at the top. We call those. Anyways, so there are all of these different levels of abilities. And what are you seeing that you're learning from them? What makes the best and most high performing students, and what sorts of techniques could we learn from observing how large cohorts learn?
I think I'd love to start where you actually already kicked us off, and it's just the context and level of understanding things. One thing that I've learned, and I've been doing it for a little more than a year, is just how well you have to understand something to be able to break it down in the simplest possible form. And I'm still not ideal at it. Just picking up, like you really have to think about your topic in a much more abstract way, right? So I can't speak obviously for other disciplines, but strictly from web dev perspective, there are some very on the nose analogies that you can use, and then there's certain things that no matter how many different spins you put into it, it's still going to be very difficult for students to understand. I don't know if I can come up with any like from the top of my head, but I can talk about like some topics that can be very difficult to students, and specifically, so like the concept of any sort of asynchronous code. They understand very very early on, like the whole concept of, well, the code just runs from top to bottom. But whenever there is a change in the control flow, this is where it becomes very difficult to just understand what exactly is a function. Why do we need to have a function, right? And all of these things that might not be natural, but they're something that are very much so building blocks for us as developers. So teaching someone from scratch what each of the concepts mean requires so much your person, like you, it requires you to understand very well what exactly is the purpose of these things before you even talk about technical side of things. For pretty much everything that you teach, it needs to be removed from the technical context, and it becomes very challenging when you're talking about things that can be, well, pretty technical, or I think it's also a problem of scale that you quite often realize, because some of the things that you talk about, they are applicable to mostly scale. I can say like things like naming methodologies, for example.
Right.
So in the course, we teach SAS, and we also teach BEM, block element modifier. So something like BEM specifically, it has historical reasons behind it. I mean, you can use it for the projects of any scale, but the actual problem that it tries to solve, it really comes from the problem of scale. And how do you teach that, right? Because within the context of a course, you can't show them a project that's going to be hundreds or thousands lines of code, because that would be not very practical, right? So a lot of these topics can be very hypothetical or theoretical. And I think it becomes very difficult to make sure that any of that sticks, right? So yeah, I know that I'm kind of like jumping between different topics and providing not that many solutions, but maybe that's a good starting point of like just
As
challenges, right?
it's about seeding the discussion. It isn't about solving the discussion that we're going through here, right? We if there's somebody watching who has solutions, but I think what you're saying is the students, because of the nature, you've got a classroom of 30 people, but each is doing their own assignment, or they're doing it in twos and threes. Your BEM system, your these things that are designed for working in large teams, are just really hard to wrap your head around. And I mean asynchronous JavaScript, you're right, because it goes top to bottom, except here. Why doesn't it go top? Why does it go through this one line? Why is it going through this line? It's like it's lying to you. I mean, it's they're really interesting things. But so let's talk about the habits of the best student, or of the highest achieving students, or the ones that get it first, or the ones that complete best. Actually, I think there are two things. Who are so let me take a further step back and describe the thing that I felt in teaching. Was we had one group of students who were the smart, cocky, I've got this thing, and they would know exactly what you were talking about right away. They would, and these were teenagers, so they would maybe roll their eyes and go boring or whatever. It was stuff like that. But when they would hand in their assignments, they would pay attention to these assignments with the level of attention and interest that they had in the class. And so I knew that they knew, but they could not demonstrate that they knew it, so they wouldn't be getting the grades that they should be getting. Now, there were also these students who didn't get it, and they didn't get it, and they didn't get it, but they didn't stop either. They would just grind, and they would ask their questions, or they didn't ask their questions, but they would come in and they would they would just work. They would come in at lunch. They would do extra time, and those ones, from my experience, were the ones that performed the best. And so it wasn't, in my opinion, about being the best or smartest in any given room, but
Mm-hmm.
it was about being the hardest working at any given time.
Yeah.
And so I think I was trying to see if you are noticing the same thing
Yeah.
today. And okay. So
100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Like, thanks, Alex. Did you really need to remind me? You already like answered your own question. 100%. 100%. Seriously. Yeah. I
Yeah.
could not agree with that more. I think like coming with, and we definitely have students who intimidate me. Like we have students who come from comp sci background, computer
Right.
engineering background, because they want something that's going to be more practical, or they've done like engineering, but they want to look more into the dev side of things, which I understand are different things, of course. Yeah, so I think we have like very smart people, and I don't doubt it for a second that they're probably like way smarter than me, and that goes for so many students. We have people from like bioengineering, and I'm super impressed by the amount of talent that we have. But with that said, people who are just bored, I think is always going to be like immediately on our radar as educators, because that understanding everything can be very deceiving. And if you become cocky, it's like that, yeah, that's like a huge flag for us, because are you actually paying attention? And
Yeah.
it happens a lot of times where students start off on a very high note. And I think the additional problem with it is that you it's I think like what you said, Alex, in terms of students who don't get it, but they just grind it, right? They just
Yeah.
like put in the effort. They understand that they're challenged and they're just like rocking through this challenge. And then students who might start on a very high note, that is so deceiving, because as soon as their ass starts to get kicked by the content, they have to like live up to this expectation that they set up for themselves, that
Right.
I'm supposed to understand this, how come I'm not getting it? And it can
Right.
be a lot more devastating on them, right? Or
Yeah.
we often say, and that might not be relevant to other maybe more traditional education institution where grades do matter, but at BrainStation, we very often say like they obviously have a passing grade. We do have
Yeah.
grades at BrainStation, but like above the passing grade, we as educators, we don't care as much. It's more about the
Right.
participation, the actual effort that you are putting into it, and
Yeah.
if you are actually growing. I'd much rather see the 70s, the 80s, and then on your projects you get feedback and you apply that feedback and you
Right.
just keep getting better and better. That to me is always going to be a much better um, uh, what's the word I'm looking like? Indication. It's a
Yeah.
much better indication that you are
Yeah.
gonna do well in this industry, right? And I
Yeah.
specifically choose that because the 12 weeks aren't gonna make you an expert developer, and we say that day one. And
Right.
I hope everybody who joins a bootcamp, they have that realization. Do they
Yeah.
graduate as full-on developers? 110%. They graduate
Right.
as amazing developers. But the reality of it is week 13, you're back to the grind. And what
Yeah.
are you going to do then? Your educators are not there, your
Yeah.
TAs are not there, the content, the structure is not there.
Yeah.
So I think just being able to power through the content, and I think Alex, you already mentioned that as well, not just asking for help, but rather trying to do it on your own first,
Right.
and then realizing when is the right time to ask for help. I
Right.
think that in itself is such an important thing. It's a very subtle balance of you have to ask for help, because you have students who just are either shy or they're too proud to ask for help. That to me is not a good indicator, because you do need to ask for help. The way we treat the course at BrainStation, that will always say that you have to look at it from a professional job perspective. That's really what's happening here. I always tell my students that think of it as apprenticeship. We are your teammates. You can think of
Right.
us TAs being your team leads, your educators being your managers, right? That's kind of the hierarchy that we have here. And when you're in a real job and someone gives you a thing to do for a week, and you spend a week and you never like raise any concerns that, hey, I don't know how to do
Right.
this ticket, right? Are you going to do well in a job position? You won't, right? You have to be able to go to your senior engineer. You have to go able to go to your team lead and ask for help at the right time, right?
Right.
So like this whole concept of what makes a good student, I think really what I'm trying to say, realizing now, is that it's the same thing as what makes a good junior developer. Because in our
Right.
eyes, as soon as they start, right, like week one, well, you're just a very junior developer. So what makes a good junior developer? Asking for help at the right time, but also being very self-reliant, I
Really
think.
proactive in hunting those
Proactive, yeah.
solutions so that
Yes.
when they ask for help, they are asking the right questions. They, rather than saying, I don't get any of it, they would be saying, listen, I really don't know. I'm really struggling to connect these two. Like if they were Lego bricks, I can't get these two Lego bricks to fit together. Is there something I'm missing in this space? And so what that does, I think, in the feedback cycle is you have somebody who is prepared to receive the information and will value it more for the amount of work they put into getting as far as they got, right? So it's the difference between a lecture where you deliver the entire lesson and just the answer when on that last little piece. And so you have more context and understanding. So have you gotten your passion back for technology then?
I have actually.
Good.
It was very it was okay for the first cohort. I didn't worry too much about it because that's what I wanted to do. I was just I had a new job high, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
I'm doing this new thing. I'm extremely challenged because my first cohort, I did not have any other educators. I was the lead educator for the cohort. So you walk up in a class in front of 20 people and you're responsible for them.
Right.
It's just terrifying in the best way possible.
Yeah.
It's like it's a sink or swim situation, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can't back out of this, right? You can't
Yeah.
just there's no can we push the delivery date? You have your 12 weeks to stop
and
the students.
and again, like we talked, these people, I don't know how much BrainStation is, but I know that some of these boot camps are like significant. They're significant, 5 figures, and
Yeah.
and and the work. And so these people have so much riding on the line, and they are doing it with the expectation that at the end of it they have employable skills, that they're going to walk out of there and walk into a job very quickly. And so that is just so much pressure, to be at the front of that room.
I don't know if I felt the pressure at the moment. I think it was more of I was in a good headspace at that
Yeah.
point, right? Like it was kind of ironic, I guess, because I was saying like it, and to be clear, it wasn't a huge uh time space. So after I quit my previous place, after I went on vacation and after I started BrainStation, it was now more than like a month and a half, maybe 2 months.
Okay.
So we're not talking about half a
Yeah.
year here of me recharging and just doing anything. But I think I also realized there were a lot of kind of internal realizations while I was still on the break. I had a bit of a break. I appreciate that. But I also realized that I need this structure. I don't know. I've never worked for myself, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I can't speak to that. I might rise to that occasion. But at the moment, at least, I realized that I like that structure of having a full-time job, right? Where I'm supposed to be somewhere. I'm supposed to be doing something. There's something like I think if you're kind of like tired, you're working on your projects, you have this idea, or like yeah, what I was gonna say is that you have that idea is that, oh, if I could just like, do nothing for ever or whatever and get paid or something like that. And you could do it for a week, maybe you could do it for two, but like to take that to an absurd extreme where you're just, oh, I just want to lie on the beach and sip your like pina coladas. That's like literal hell because people need something to do. You will
Yeah.
not have a good time of just relaxing. It's impossible. Your mind is just going to go nuts. So I was definitely like so grateful, so happy to just be working, not because I needed money or anything like that. I was just like the act of working, that whole like myth of Sisyphus situation where
Yeah.
you're like pushing the boulder up the mountain because, well, you're just doing something kind of a thing, right? I'm not saying that working at BrainStation is like, well, at least
Yeah.
I'm doing something.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, so
I,
you're saying Sisyphus has probably got a pretty sweet gig. It's
it's something. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. If he was drinking pina coladas, I think he would
yeah,
be a little bit more depressed.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
At least he gets to, work out or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't remember being too, it's like one of those like adrenaline things, right? Where
Yeah.
you just show up every day and you do your best kind of a situation. So um yeah, so it wasn't too bad. But I think after that, after the initial cohort, the other thoughts started crawling into my head. And that thought was back to a different version of what am I doing exactly? Like
Yeah.
what is this gonna be? Like I'm not an engineer anymore, right? And there's also this huge imposter syndrome from perspective of not just who am I to teach this, right? Like you do this
Well,
first,
you were good. I think it is probably important for you to hear this, but when we were on the team together, I definitely looked at you as a very strong developer, and you knew your stuff. And so I mean, I
I
know
appreciate that.
that in my case, I would, if I had imposter syndrome and one person told me that, then I would probably still have imposter syndrome. But it's, I think it's important to hear that sometimes. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I appreciate this. But I think where that becomes a little challenging is for the first two cohorts, you feel like first cohort, you're like, how am I to teach this? Right?
yeah,
Because I have no idea what content looks like. So you kind of have to know what your curriculum looks like from the perspective of a whole program. I think you can like
yeah,
prepare to it all you want, but unless you deliver it, it's a whole other like ball game, right? So that's the first cohort. The second cohort can be a bit more of like, who am I to teach this? And then the third cohort becomes, how am I going to continue to teach this? What I mean by that is I'm teaching something that's supposed to be employable skills after they
yeah,
graduate.
yes,
And now I'm half a year out of the engineering
right,
position. Now I'm a year outside of an
yes,
engineer position. And that becomes kind of this combined thought, imposter
yeah,
syndrome never goes away. So here's a new version of Daniil's imposter syndrome. How am I going to stay current in this
hmm,
position? How am I supposed to teach something that I'm not anymore the expert in the industry, right? And I
right,
put in the quotes because it always kind of cringes me when I hear people refer to me as expert. But let's just say that, okay, I'll agree that I'm an expert, but how am I supposed to stay an expert in the industry if I'm out of the industry,
right,
right? So there's that aspect of it. And I think even though your question was, so did you find the passion in
yeah,
technology back? And the answer is going to be yes. And I rectified that, I think, at the end of last year, which was pretty much like my year at BrainStation. So I had these two problems, right? Like, how do I know that what I'm teaching actually is going to be the right thing to teach? Because I always want to deliver quality.
yeah,
So how do I make sure that it's the most, not just up to date is irrelevant, right? It's what is most most marketable, most seeked skill
Right.
on the resume, because you're 100% right. That's the whole purpose of a boot camp, is to get employed. But the other aspect of it is, and I'll say that without any sort of embarrassment, is that I do need to, and I'm pretty sure I already said it before, right? The whole like oxygen mask, right? I need to take care
Yeah.
of myself, right? So another part of me was, well, what am I doing? Like, I'm out of the engineering job for a year as well. So it does not benefit my students. It doesn't benefit me. So I'm like panicking in terms of like, if I need to apply for jobs, it's
Right.
tell us about your experience. I taught at BrainStation. What did you teach? It's the same course every semester, and we cover like junior full stack developer. So my naive approach to that was, and I was telling that to my friends, is, well, worst case scenario, I know this course very well, so I can just be a kick-ass junior full stack developer. And I'm like, I'm
Right.
okay with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, first, it's like the stages, right? It's like, what's the first stage? It's like depression, and
Yeah.
it's like acceptance and stuff.
Bargaining. Yeah.
Bargaining. Yeah, exactly. So where I'm at right now, and I think that's where I became a little bit more at peace with everything, is who cares what I need to do in upcoming year, 2 years? Who cares? Because I didn't know, 2 years ago that I would be doing this. In my wildest
Right.
dreams, I wouldn't think of that, right? So I think that's a very important aspect. Is like, yes, of course, you need to plan for the future, but at the same time, it's cool to just do whatever you are doing. And I think the life has a way to work itself out, kind of thing. And I'm enjoying this. I think I'm I'm good at what I do, and it's
Yeah.
important to recognize that, right? I think I'm a good engineer, but it also landed me in a place where I was freaking out, where it wasn't just working out for me anymore, right? So I think, I know it was a very simple question of like, did you find the passion for technology? Like, did you find it back? Or I believe that's how you asked me that question. But it's actually a very, I really appreciate you asking that question. It's a very deep question for me, because I lost that passion,
Right.
right? And I wanted to see, I guess, what it looks like. So doing this course really taught me how much people's eyes light up when they see something work, right?
Right.
And you lose that magic moment very uh, frequently, I would say. And that's
Yeah.
like that, to go back to when I was saying that I this burnout, this feeling disillusioned by the tech industry, it wasn't a singular thing. It happened to me at least 3 times in my career. And
Right.
every single time, the only way that it worked out, is that I had to find my passion again. And I
Yeah.
believe the first time it was just, changing the job to something that was a bit more motivating. And then pretty much the other 2 times it was just finding a more interesting technology where,
Yeah.
it's gonna I should probably, I don't know, React is open source. I was gonna say React should pay me money, because that could be the slogan of my life. React saved my developer career, right? Because it's like I really fell in love with it. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that was the magic moment again, where it's like, let's go, let's go. I just want to do this. I want to be a React developer, for example, specifically. So seeing
Yeah.
this passion in students' eyes was very important. But I think it also kind of puts the fire under my ass to just like do something, because they have so much like passion for working on their stuff. And yeah, I just kind of, you always have hard time finding time, and all I had
Yes.
to do is just dedicate that time, right? I
Yeah.
think like I know this is not what is it, like uh life advice or
Well,
motivational
that's part of
speech channel.
that's what we're here for
Okay,
sure.
awesome. So we
Yeah.
can we can do self-help.
Yeah.
The last half an hour, an hour of the podcast, we just dive into self-help. So the self-help portion of it is that there's no such thing as motivation. You just need to get up and do your shit, right? So that's what I ended up doing. I was just like, concentrate on just doing something, and I found that I enjoy building things for the sake of building things. I think like
Right.
my realization was that corporate development can be just very challenging. And again, this is just very subjective. People do that constantly, day in, day out, and they know how to find enjoyment in that. But at some point, I just lost that enjoyment at that point in my career. And now I just realized that maybe it's kind of back to, what does it mean to be a developer? And in my eyes, it's like, well, if I just code, I can still be a developer. But
Right.
it opened up so much more passion for me because now I can work on whatever I want to work, right? It
Right.
doesn't have to be, sometimes when you make decisions for work, they always come with consequences, right? Like you
Yeah.
always, I'm sure you've heard that term before, is that boring technology is good for a reason, right? You want to
Yes.
pick technology that needs to be proven, right?
I
And
say that.
sometimes
I say that a lot. Yeah. At
that's
the
the
end of the
truth.
day. Yeah.
I say that to my students all the time. I'm like,
Yeah.
because they always ask, like, what about this thing? What about this thing? And I'm like, yeah, it's awesome. Play around with it. But if we're talking about professional software,
Yeah.
boring technology is always going to be good. Because
Right.
when it's like it's crunch time, you don't want to figure out this crazy library, that you just downloaded last week, kind of a thing. You want to work on something that will
Right.
have million Stack Overflow answers and someone else run into this problem for you, right? um
Yeah.
but I enjoy that. I enjoy also playing around with the new tech and just understanding more about um some maybe lateral things. So I haven't started looking into too many of these things, but I have a big list of things, and I feel a lot more elated that I can work on them without feeling like the pressure that I need to, stay current with whatever's happening with React, whatever's happening with
Right.
CSS, right? Because that kind of becomes, I can stay current with that because I need to know what is best for the students, but within the context of this course that I think is the best course for a full stack developer. So that's my responsibility. But when it comes to my own personal growth, that's where all the doors are open. And that's what made me kind of really excited about it again. Is that like I
Yeah.
can build my own projects. I can learn a bit of data science or machine learning because it doesn't have to be applicable to anything. It's just whatever interests me. So
Right.
I'm pretty psyched about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I actually I think we've covered a lot of good topics, and I think we can probably start to wrap this up. I think
Absolutely.
yeah. If anybody wants to reach out to you, would they where would they find you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have anything to plug here.
Yeah.
So if you want to chat about what it's like to be part of a boot camp, if you're interested in taking a boot camp, I would always love to talk to you. Completely not obligated to plug BrainStation to you as much as I love this company. I can tell you why I think it's a great place to be. But yeah, I don't really have any plugs. I haven't been working on my music for a while, so there's nothing new there. It was
Okay.
just very, very lovely to catch up with you, Alex.
It really was. It really
I
was.
really appreciate you inviting me because I was keeping an eye on you kicking this off, and when I saw this, I'm like, this makes sense, and I'm not blowing like smoke up your ass. Like honestly, I
Yeah.
was like, hell yeah, I want to see Alex just chat with people, and I'm like beyond happy that you invited me and we had this
I
conversation. So thank you,
I
man.
I've had a really good time tonight, and on all of them so far. Each one has been more fun than the last, I think. And thank you so much for doing this, and
I
thank you
will
for the
need to.
like.
I
And
will need to. Yeah, I will need to go back and rewatch them now for sure. I'll
yeah,
be honest, I haven't had a chance yet, but I'll definitely catch up on it.
well, that's okay. I mean, so one of the reasons that I'm doing, I have the screen up in front of me, so I'm looking up there. I've got 2, 4, 5. I've got 6 hours plus this, so I'm almost up to 10 hours of this stuff. Um, and this is based on the way that I've consumed podcasts, is if I find one that I like, you don't have to dip into the first one. You can,
Mhm.
or you can just hop on at any time, and then if you go, oh, I actually like this format, then you can go back and listen to the other ones, and you say, oh, maybe you are, maybe you're doing your dishes, or maybe you're cooking dinner and it's on in the background, and it's actually because of the things that we've said to each other in a professional context. Somebody who just listens to that gets the benefit of ongoing professional development without doing the reading, right?
Yeah.
Without bashing their head against the wall. They just sort of have this stuff, and they're thinking about concepts, and they're hopefully growing in their professional career just by merely thinking about the learnings that you've had, that you're delivering to me and delivering to the wider audience. And so I think at some point this will transform into a high value product.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say the same thing. I realized through this conversation that there's just so many things that kind of both of us can relate to, right? And in both of our experiences. So it makes me very curious, just to yeah, to see the same patterns kind of emerge from other
Yeah,
conversations, because I think it really solidifies and in a way almost therapeutical to to hear people go through the same struggles. And
right.
I think there's a lot of emphasis on just celebrating the successes, and that's
Yeah,
amazing, and we absolutely need to do that. But there's so much grind behind all of the successes, right? And I think like
yeah,
those, I love the way that you decide to kind of have this conversation with your guests and just talk about what is meaningful to them. Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's very powerful.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. We can end it here, and I will probably I'm probably going to have to take a few extra days to edit this one, because I have you and Jeff Wong, who I recorded with last night. So, and this is a lot of, it's turning into a lot of work, but I just enjoy it so much that I can't stop.
I love to hear that.
All
Yeah.
right.
Cool.
Anyways,
Okay. Have a great night, Alex.
you too.
Bye.
So that was Daniil. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Something else that I'd like to take on as maybe a bit of an aside is part of the big ideas theme that I really wanted to explore as part of this podcast. I've seen a number of moves happen recently in the news surrounding digital healthcare. Specifically, the thing that triggered this was Microsoft's recent acquisition for $20 billion of a healthcare focused business. I think there are a number of things that are going to happen within roughly a 5-year horizon that will truly, truly disrupt the healthcare space from a digital perspective. And I think it's a really exciting world to come, and I'd love to talk to you about it. And so I'm going to try and produce that while I'm also working on this next interview, and I hope to have that to you soon. Thank you.